Hello, my name is Kristen Walden, and I'd like to welcome you to The Other Side of History. Now, in the last talk in this series, we talked on the Tudor dynasty. And in this talk, I would like to give you the history of King Henry VIII's wives who bare him no children. Now, Henry had made a break with Rome so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. And this had soured things when it came to Catholics. After Jane Seymour had died, and in giving birth to his only son, Edward, he married a princess of a small Germanic duchy named Anne of Cleves, and she was a Lutheran Protestant. Henry's daughter, Mary, was not happy when she learnt of her new stepmother and feared that her future stepmother was a heretic. Henry annulled the marriage with Anne of Cleves, and the impression is sometimes given that she was unattractive. However, even those who were opposed to her because of her being Protestant seemed to admire her and called her fair. The French ambassador said that she was tall, slim, and beautiful. He also said that he believed that she lacked social skills, but was courteous, gentle, and a good housekeeper. However, as one story is told, he took one look at Anne, arranged for immediate annulment, and beheaded the man who had arranged the match. This is the story that claims that Anne of Cleves was unattractive. If we look at the politics of the situation, politically, the marriage of Henry and Anne would have been troubled. Anne was a Lutheran Protestant, and the Catholics would not have been in favor of the marriage. The Catholic alliance between France and Spain had also weakened at this time, which reduced the political importance of the marriage for Protestants. I believe the real reason that Henry got rid of Anne of Cleves was because Anne's brother, the Duke of Cleves, was entangled in disagreements with the Holy Roman Empire, and he had no intention of being dragged into a foreign war. Thomas Cromwell was a Protestant and had arranged for the marriage between Henry and Anne of Cleves. Henry became angry that Cromwell had arranged this marriage with a sister of the Holy Roman Emperor's enemy, the Duke of Cleves. Henry said that he wanted the marriage stopped, but there was no reason for them to not be married. It's been said that Henry made up the stuff about Anne being ugly, smelly, not a virgin, and betrothed to another man to stop the wedding. And in the end, Cromwell, he was beheaded. When Thomas Cromwell was the king's chief advisor, the reformers had the upper hand in some ways. King Henry, he had dissolved the monasteries in the kingdom, keeping the riches for himself. He had an English translation of the Bible placed in every parish church. The lay people were able to read the Bible for themselves, instead of having to have a Latin-speaking priest interpret God's word for them. When Thomas Cromwell was executed for treason, and this was in 1540, the power of the reformers ended. Protestants who came too close to the teachings of the reformers, they were burnt at the stake for heresy. As the German story goes of King Henry and Anne of Cleves' first meeting, their first meeting went perfectly well. They were happy with each other, and although they needed a translator for their conversation, everything went just fine. The English, they have a funny story of Anne's first meeting with Henry. When Anne arrived in England, Henry dressed up in common dress, and he made a surprise visit to Anne of Cleves, pretending to deliver a gift to her from the king. If Henry had some kind of a romanticized idea that Anne would madly fall in love with him at first sight, he was disappointed. Anne didn't know who this intruder was that came into her room, and did not act as though she was madly in love with this overweight, middle-aged man with gout. It was said that Anne basically told Henry that she thought that he was old, ugly, and fat. Henry's huge ego was hurt, and his romanticized idea of Anne falling in love at first sight was gone. In the end, the story got twisted into Anne being fat, stinky, and unsexy. However, the fat, stinky, and unsexy person was not the 24-year-old Anne of Cleves, but the 49-year-old King Henry VIII of England. The reason that this version of the story gives for the annulment was because Henry felt there was a lack of romantic chemistry between the two of them, and his ego was hurt. It's also possible that Henry wanted to choose his own lover, and perhaps already had his sights on the lady-in-waiting, Kathryn Howard, who did feed his ego and became the next queen. Whatever happened between Henry and Anne, in the end, they became friends. Anne was given a pension, a country house, and treated with great respect. Henry would often visit her to enjoy her splendid cooking and comfortable companionship. At court, she was considered the king's honorable sister, and she remained a close friend of the Tudor family throughout her life. After the marriage to Anne of Cleves was annulled, he married the flighty, naive teenager, Kathryn Howard. Kathryn was Anne Boleyn's cousin, but had been raised Catholic, and she was not pious. After her infidelity was thoroughly proven, Henry had her lover hanged, drawn, and quartered, and then beheaded. Kathryn herself was also beheaded. Henry's last wife was Katherine Parr, and she was Protestant. She had been twice widowed before she married King Henry, and was experienced in the art of managing elderly husbands. She was intelligent and shrewd in a political sense, and both aware of her responsibilities to the Tudor family and to England, and willing to fulfill them. She made sure that Henry's 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, had an excellent education, and did much to ease the final painful years of King Henry. Mary, she was a devout Catholic, but it's been said that Kathryn actually got Mary to translate the Gospel of John for her English language edition of an Erasmus treatise. Now, Kathryn maintained a close, warm relationship with all 3 of the children. Kathryn tried her best to bring the 3 children into the royal family's home life. She arranged for the children to have visits with their father. She helped to give a sense of unity to the estranged children. She did much tutoring for Elizabeth. She corrected Edward's Latin exercises and sent a court musician to perform for Mary. Kathryn was a key player in both restoring Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession. Elizabeth, she expressed profound admiration and love for her stepmother, Katherine Parr. She talked of her fervent zeal towards all godly learning. Katherine was the first woman in England to publish an original work under her own name in English. Elizabeth, she translated into Latin, Italian, and French Katherine's book, which was Prayers and Meditations. And she even presented it to her father. It seems that Katherine did try to get Henry to embrace Protestantism, and she emphasized that salvation was by faith alone. She also supported the translating of the Bible into English. However, although Henry did break with Rome and made himself the head of the Church of England, he was still a Catholic at heart. Henry was actually frustrated with Katherine and felt that she was pushing the Roman Church even further away, and he did not like being told what to do, especially by a woman. Henry once complained to an advisor, "A thing much to my comfort," he said, "to come in mine old days to be taught by my wife." End quote. The Catholic faction saw the king's dissatisfaction with the Protestant Queen Katherine. They convinced Henry to sign a warrant for Katherine's arrest on charges of heresy. If the Catholic faction had their way, Katherine would have been convicted and burnt at the stake. But God protected Katherine. Being warned of the plot against her, she immediately went to King Henry. She said that she had engaged him in religious discussions only to learn from his wisdom and to comfort him when he was ailing. Henry, who loved flattery, he decided to forgive his intelligent and attractive wife, Katherine Parr. There is a surviving letter from Queen Elizabeth I that calls Katherine her anchor, supreme head and governor here on earth, next to God. End quote. That is quite a statement from the intelligent and independent Elizabeth I. It is obvious that Katherine had a very positive influence on Elizabeth's education and helped to shape this future queen's character and worldview. When Elizabeth would write to Katherine, she would talk of her daughter's love and daughter's devotion to her. Katherine, being Protestant, fostered Elizabeth's interest in Protestantism and scholarship. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, would have been so happy if she would have known that God had put in place such a Protestant stepmother as Katherine to train her daughter. Katherine was a highly intelligent woman, and King Henry, he gave her the role as regent in his absence. This provided Elizabeth with an excellent example of a woman wielding full power, and this greatly influenced her understanding of leadership. Now, Katherine and her ladies would often meet to discuss the latest religious writings. Katherine herself had published 4 religious texts. After King Henry VIII's death, Elizabeth continued to live in Katherine's household, and they maintained their close relationship. Katherine was the mother that Elizabeth never was able to have. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, she was beheaded when Elizabeth was only 2 years and 8 months old. After King Henry VIII passed, Katherine married Thomas Seymour in a private ceremony. She married just 5 months after the death of Henry, and many people viewed this as unseemingly hasty. Kathryn had known Thomas Seymour before she had married King Henry VIII. Thomas had wanted to marry Kathryn then, but when King Henry asked Kathryn's hand in marriage, Kathryn accepted Henry's proposal. After all, King Henry VIII got what he wanted. When Kathryn married Thomas Seymour, right after Henry's death, there was gossip, but Kathryn was the only wife that King Henry VIII had who survived him. She was never accused of adultery or being unfaithful to the king. Henry called Kathryn a faithful spouse and left her a pension and rights to his jewels and clothes. Henry left Kathryn a rich and influential widow. However, Kathryn seemed to be better at choosing her faith and books than her husband. Thomas Seymour was not a good character, but you can read about him for yourself. He was the brother of Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour. Now, Jane Seymour was Catholic, but her brother claimed to be Protestant, Thomas Seymour. Katherine Parr, she married Sir Thomas Seymour in 1547. Then, the next year, she became pregnant with her first child. It was a difficult pregnancy, and she died from childbirth fever, only 8 days after giving birth to a daughter named Mary. Kathryn was only 36 years old. In her shortened life, she did much as an advocate, however, for Protestantism and education, and today we still benefit from her intellectual contributions and published writings. I hope that you have enjoyed this little talk and that you find this history interesting. If you have, I would just encourage you to click on that subscribe button. I want to thank each one of you who have subscribed, and I just am asking for God's blessings to be on each one of you.